Welcome to Terrifying Stories. Tonight, I bring you 9 true stories that will unsettle you deeply. These are not tales of monsters or the supernatural. Instead, they are grounded in harsh reality. Disturbing camping incidents that have left people shaken to their core. Identities are protected, and some details altered, but every story is drawn from real reports and testimonies. What you will hear is the kind of fear that comes from the unknown within the ordinary, the moments when safety vanishes and doubt takes hold. These stories are calm on the surface, but they carry a weight that may linger long after the last word. Be warned, this is not for the faint of heart. If you choose to listen, do so with care. Now let us begin. I planned the camping trip without much thought. I just wanted to get away from work, from noise, from screens, from people. I picked a random national forest a few hours away. Nothing famous, nothing that showed up on social media posts. I chose it because it looked empty on the map and because there was a long dirt road leading deep into it. I packed my car the night before with a tent, sleeping bag, small stove, cooler, water jugs, flashlight, extra batteries, first aid kit, and enough food for 3 days. I told one person where I was going, not because I felt unsafe, but because it felt responsible. I slept a few hours and left before sunrise. The drive was quiet and long. The highway slowly turned into smaller roads, then into a narrow road with cracked pavement, then into dirt. Trees closed in on both sides. There were no houses, no signs, no cell service. The forest felt old and thick. The air smelled like damp leaves and pine. My tires kicked up dust that hung in the air behind me. I drove slowly, careful not to hit rocks or deep ruts. I passed one empty pull-off with a rusted fire ring, then another. I kept going, wanting to be far from anyone else. After almost an hour on the dirt road, I found a spot near a bend where a narrow clearing opened up. There was a flat area, a stone fire ring, and a fallen log near the edge of the trees. No trash, no tire tracks that looked recent. Felt unused. I turned off the engine and sat for a minute, listening. There was no wind. I could hear insects and distant birds. No human sounds. That silence felt heavy but calm. I unloaded the car slowly, taking my time. I set up the tent facing away from the road. The ground was dry but soft enough to take stakes. I laid out my sleeping bag and pad, then set up the stove on a flat rock. I stacked firewood I found nearby, dry branches and thicker logs that had already fallen. Everything felt normal. Nothing felt wrong. The sun was still low, light filtering through the trees in long lines. Once camp was set, I walked around the area to get familiar with it. I followed a faint path that led away from the clearing and into thicker forest. I did not plan to go far, just enough to see what was around. The ground was uneven, covered in leaves and roots. The trees were tall and close together. It was easy to lose track of direction, so I made sure to look back often and note landmarks. A broken stump, a large rock, a tree with bark stripped away. After about 15 minutes, I turned back toward camp. When I returned, everything was exactly as I left it. That brought a small sense of comfort. I cooked a simple meal and ate sitting on the log. The food tasted better than it would have at home. The quiet made every sound louder, the scrape of metal, the crunch of food. As the day moved on, the forest warmed up. Insects buzzed. Birds moved from branch to branch. Time felt slower. In the afternoon, I decided to gather more firewood. I walked farther this time, careful to stay within sight of the clearing. I dragged back several long pieces and stacked them neatly. I checked my supplies, checked my flashlight, checked the batteries. Everything was fine. Still, I felt a small tension in my chest, the kind that comes when you realize how far you are from help. I ignored it. As evening came, the light changed. Shadows stretched and deepened. The forest looked different, darker, more closed in. I lit a small fire and sat close to it. The crackle of burning wood was comforting. Smoke drifted upward and disappeared into the trees. I watched the flames and felt myself relax. Night fell fast. The sky above the trees turned black. Stars were visible in small patches. The fire was the only real light. Sounds changed. Insects grew louder. Something moved in the distance, branches snapping softly. I told myself it was just animals. That was normal. That was expected. I crawled into my tent later than planned. The fire burned down to embers. I zipped the tent shut and lay on my back, staring at the dark fabric above me. The forest sounds continued. I felt tired but alert. Sleep came slowly. At some point in the night, I woke up. I did not know why at first. Then I heard something. Footsteps. Slow and steady. They were not close, but they were not far either. They moved in a straight line, not like an animal darting around. The sound stopped, then started again, closer this time. My heart began to beat faster. I stayed still. I listened. The steps moved past the clearing, then faded into the distance. No voices, no lights, nothing else. Just footsteps. After a long time, silence returned. I lay awake for hours after that, every sound making my muscles tense. Morning came with gray light and fog. The forest looked pale and damp. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. Everything looked normal. The fire pit was cold. The ground around the clearing showed no clear tracks, but the soil was hard and covered in leaves, so that meant nothing. I made breakfast and drank coffee, trying to calm my nerves. I told myself that someone else might have been camping nearby, or a hiker passing through. The road was not far. It was possible. Still, I felt watched. I kept turning around, scanning the trees. I decided to stay another night anyway. I did not want fear to decide for me. I spent the day exploring short distances, never leaving camp for long. I found an old piece of cloth caught on a branch, faded and torn. That made me uneasy. I left it where it was. In the afternoon, I noticed something else. A stick had been placed upright near the edge of the clearing. I was sure it had not been there before. It was stuck into the ground at an angle, deliberate. Could have fallen that way, but it did not look random. I stared at it for a long time, then removed it and tossed it into the woods. That night, I did not light a fire. I stayed in the tent as darkness fell. The forest felt louder than before. Every sound felt closer. Hours passed slowly. Then the footsteps came back. This time they circled the clearing. Slow, careful. I could hear leaves crunching, branches brushing against clothing. Whoever it was did not rush. They stopped near my tent. I held my breath. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. The steps moved away again, slowly, deliberately. I did not sleep at all after that. When morning came, I packed everything as fast as I could. My hands shook as I folded the tent and loaded the car. I kept looking into the trees, expecting to see someone standing there. I saw nothing. As I drove away, I did not feel relief right away. I felt heavy, like something had followed me out of the forest. That feeling stayed with me for hours. It only faded when I reached the highway and saw other cars, other people. At home, days later, I still thought about that trip, about the footsteps, about the stick. Nothing truly bad happened. I was not hurt. Nothing was stolen. But the fear felt real because it was real. Someone was there. Someone watched me. That was enough. I still camp, but never alone, and never that far from others. Some places are empty for a reason, and some silences are not as peaceful as they seem. I planned the camping trip without much thought. It was not about adventure or escape in some deep emotional way. I just wanted quiet and distance from everything familiar. I chose a public forest area that allowed dispersed camping. No campsites, no bathrooms, no signs beyond the entrance road. Just a long dirt road that split into smaller ones, all of them marked on an old Forest Service map I downloaded weeks earlier. The place was several hours away from the nearest town. Cell service ended miles before the entrance. I liked that. I wanted to be unreachable. I packed slowly over 2 days. I checked my gear again and again, not because I was nervous, but because it felt calming. Tent, sleeping bag, foam pad, extra tarp, headlamp with spare batteries, backup flashlight, stove, fuel, canned food, dry food, water jugs, filter, first aid kit, knife, extra socks, rain jacket, small hatchet, rope, map, compass, and a printed copy of the area layout. I brought a cheap wristwatch because my phone would mostly be useless. I filled my gas tank the night before and left early in the morning. The drive felt longer than it was. The road narrowed and the traffic thinned until I was alone with trees and occasional broken fences. The forest changed slowly. Taller trees, thicker undergrowth, fewer signs of people. I rolled my windows down even though it was cold. The air smelled damp and old, the kind of smell that feels heavy in your chest. I turned off the radio when static took over and drove the rest of the way in silence. The entrance was nothing more than a wooden post with faded paint and a small sign nailed to it. No gate, no ranger station, just a dirt road leading into dense forest. I checked my map one last time and drove in. The road was rough but manageable. I followed it for several miles, passing a few narrow turnoffs that looked barely used. I wanted distance but not total isolation, so I chose a spot near a bend in the road where the trees opened just enough to park and walk in a short distance. I parked the car facing outward, a habit I always kept. I shut the engine off and sat there for a minute, listening. No wind, no birds, just a deep quiet that made every small sound feel loud. When I opened the door, it creaked in a way that sounded wrong in such a quiet place. I carried my gear in 2 trips. I chose a spot about 50 yards from the road, far enough that I could not see the car but close enough to reach it fast if needed. The ground was mostly flat, covered in old needles and dry leaves. No fresh tracks that I could see. I checked above for dead branches and felt satisfied enough to start setting up. The tent went up without trouble. I staked it down carefully, more carefully than usual. The forest felt still in a way that made me aware of my own movements. Every step sounded too loud. I laid out my sleeping pad and bag and left the tent unzipped to air out. I set up a small cooking area with a flat rock and cleared leaves in a wide circle. I did not plan to have a fire. I did not want the smell or the light. By early afternoon, everything was done. I ate a simple meal and drank water slowly. I walked a short loop around the area, marking trees mentally so I would not get turned around later. The forest was thicker than it looked from the road. Visibility dropped fast once you stepped away from open space. Everything looked similar. Trunks, branches, shadows. I paid attention to small details. A fallen log with pale bark. A cluster of stones. A tree split down the middle. As the sun moved lower, the temperature dropped. I put on my jacket and sat on a log near my tent. I felt calm but alert. That mix where your body feels relaxed but your senses stay sharp. The kind of feeling you get when you know you are responsible for yourself and no one else is around to help. The first strange feeling came before any clear reason for it. Just a sense that something about the place was off. Not dangerous, not threatening, just off. The forest was too quiet. Not silent, but empty. No distant bird calls. No insects. Even the wind barely moved the leaves. I tried to tell myself it was normal. Different forests behave differently. Time of day matters. Weather matters. I checked my watch. Late afternoon. Still hours of daylight. I decided to walk a bit farther out, not far, just enough to see more of the area. I took my compass and followed a straight line away from camp for about 10 minutes, then stopped. The forest here felt tighter. The trees grew closer together. The ground dipped slightly and the light dimmed faster. I turned back, following the compass bearing carefully, and returned without issue. When I saw my tent again, relief hit me harder than expected. As evening came, the quiet deepened. I cooked another simple meal and cleaned up carefully. I sealed all food and put it away. I checked the ground again for tracks. Still nothing obvious. I brushed my teeth with bottled water and zipped the tent most of the way, leaving a small opening for air. I lay on my back and stared at the tent ceiling as the light faded. Night fell fast, faster than I expected. The forest went from gray to black in what felt like minutes. I turned off my headlamp and let my eyes adjust. The darkness was complete. No moonlight filtered through. The trees blocked everything. I could not see my hand in front of my face. Sounds returned slowly. Not loud ones. Small ones. Leaves shifting. Something moving far away. Branches settling. Normal forest sounds, but without a reference point, they felt closer than they were. I lay still and listened. My breathing sounded too loud, so I slowed it down. At some point, I fell asleep. I woke suddenly with no clear reason. My eyes opened and I knew instantly I was awake. The darkness was the same. The quiet felt heavier. I checked my watch by touch and then turned on my headlamp just enough to see the time. It was after midnight. I listened. There was a sound I could not place at first. A soft, irregular noise. Not footsteps. Not an animal call. More like movement through brush, but slow and uneven. It would stop, then start again. It did not circle. It stayed in one general direction. I stayed still. I told myself it was an animal. Deer maybe, or something smaller moving cautiously. I waited for the sound to move away. It did not. It stopped, then started again, closer this time. Still no clear pattern. My body tensed without me choosing to. My hands felt cold. I held the headlamp but did not turn it on. Light can make things worse. Light shows where you are. The sound stopped completely. The silence that followed was worse. It lasted long enough that my ears strained for anything. Then there was a new sound. A single branch snapping. Not loud but close. Too close. I sat up slowly inside the tent. The fabric shifted softly. I froze again. Nothing followed. No rush. No heavy steps. Just the quiet pressing in. Minutes passed. Maybe more. Time felt stretched and thin. I stayed upright, listening. Eventually the sounds moved away, slowly, deeper into the forest. I did not sleep again for a long time. Morning came as a pale gray light seeping through the tent fabric. I felt drained, like I had not rested at all. My muscles were stiff. My mouth felt dry. I listened before unzipping the tent. Birds had returned. Real ones. The forest sounded alive again. I stepped out slowly and looked around. The ground near the tent showed disturbed leaves in one area. Not clear tracks, but enough to show something had moved there. I followed it a short distance and stopped. The marks became scattered and then vanished. I felt a strong urge to pack up and leave right then. The rational part of my mind argued against it. No clear danger. No proof of anything unusual. Just normal forest activity and nerves amplified by isolation and darkness. I decided to stay one more night, but I changed my behavior. I moved my cooking area closer to the tent. I organized my gear more tightly. I kept my headlamp and flashlight within reach at all times. The day passed slowly. I explored less. I stayed close. I drank more water than usual and forced myself to eat even though my appetite was low. I checked the sky often. Clouds rolled in by afternoon. Thick ones. The light dimmed early again. By evening, the forest felt closed in. The air felt heavy. I set everything up for the night earlier than before. I double-checked the area around camp. No fresh signs that I could see. Still, the unease stayed with me. Night fell again. This time there was wind. It moved the branches and made the forest sound restless. I welcomed it. Wind explained sounds. Wind made movement predictable. I lay down and waited for sleep. Came in short bursts. I woke often, each time unsure why. The wind faded at some point. The forest went quiet again. Then the sound returned. This time it was different. Heavier. More deliberate. It came from the same direction as the night before. Slow movement through brush. Stops. Starts. Pauses that felt intentional. I reached for my flashlight and turned it on inside the tent, keeping it pointed down. The light steadied me a little. I listened harder. The sound came closer than before. Leaves shifted. Something brushed against low branches. I did not move. I did not breathe deeply. I waited. Then the sound stopped right outside the tent. I could hear breathing. Not fast. Not panicked. Slow and steady. Too steady. It stayed there, just on the other side of the fabric. I stared at the tent wall, my light off now, my body locked in place. The breathing stayed for a long time, long enough that my fear shifted into something dull and heavy. My mind tried to make sense of it. Animal. Large animal. But animals do not breathe like that when they stop moving. Not that close. not without other sounds. The breathing moved slightly, circling the tent. I heard the ground shift under weight. Not rushing, not cautious, just moving. I felt completely exposed. A thin layer of fabric between me and whatever was there. My heart beat so hard I worried it could be heard. Eventually, after what felt like forever, the sound moved away, slowly. No sudden retreat, just a gradual increase in distance until it blended into the forest. I did not sleep after that. When the sky began to lighten, I packed as fast as I could without making noise mistakes. My hands shook. I dropped things. I forced myself to slow down enough to stay quiet but fast enough to leave. I did not eat. I did not explore. I loaded the car and started the engine with shaking hands. The drive out felt endless. Every shadow looked like movement. Every bend in the road made my chest tighten. When I reached the main road and saw another vehicle, the relief was physical. My shoulders dropped. My breathing eased. I did not go back to that place. I did not report anything because I had nothing clear to report. No proof. No clear explanation. Just sounds, movement, and fear. What stayed with me was not the idea of something unknown or unreal. It was the realization of how thin the line is between safety and vulnerability when you are alone. How quickly the forest reminds you that you are not in control. You are just a visitor, tolerated at best. I ended the trip early, returned home, unpacked slowly, and cleaned my gear. Life went on. But sometimes at night, when everything is quiet, I remember the sound of that breathing through thin fabric, steady and patient, and the way the forest closed in without warning. I went camping alone at the end of summer, not because I wanted adventure, but because I needed quiet. Work had been loud in every way. Phones, screens, people needing answers right away. I picked a public forest hours away, a place with marked sites and a dirt road that was supposed to be passable for regular cars. Nothing extreme, nothing risky on paper. I packed like I always did. Tent, sleeping bag, food that would not spoil, water jugs, a small stove, extra clothes, first aid kit, flashlight, batteries, map, compass, and my phone even though I did not expect service. I told one person where I was going and when I planned to be back. Felt responsible enough. The drive itself already felt like a separation from normal life. Paved road turned to cracked pavement, then gravel, then dirt. Trees closed in from both sides. The radio lost signal and went quiet, so I turned it off. Dust followed my car and settled on the windows. I slowed down to avoid rocks. Every few miles there was a small sign with a faded arrow pointing deeper into the forest. I followed the numbers on the map and counted each turn carefully. I did not want to end up somewhere I was not supposed to be. When I reached the campground, it was emptier than I expected. There were maybe 12 sites total. Only 2 were occupied, both far apart. I chose one near the edge, not too close to anyone else but still within sight of the main loop road. The ground was mostly flat with patches of pine needles and dry dirt. There was a metal fire ring, a picnic table, and a wooden post with the site number carved into it. Nothing fancy. That was exactly what I wanted. I parked, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a minute. The silence was heavy but calm. Wind moved through the trees in waves. Somewhere far away a bird called, then stopped. The air smelled like dry wood and dust. I stepped out of the car and stretched. My legs felt stiff from the drive. I walked around the site slowly, checking the ground for rocks and roots where I would put the tent. I noticed old fire ash in the ring and a few bottle caps half buried near the table. People had been here before, but not recently. Setting up camp took time, but it was familiar work. I laid out the tent, smoothed the ground as best I could, and staked it down. I checked the corners twice to make sure it was tight. I placed my sleeping bag and pad inside, arranged my backpack near the entrance, and hung my food bag from a rope on a nearby branch, high enough to keep animals away. I placed my flashlight and knife within easy reach inside the tent. Habit more than fear. As the afternoon went on, the light changed. Shadows stretched across the ground and the air cooled. I cooked a simple meal on the stove and ate slowly at the picnic table. The food tasted better than it would have at home. Maybe it was the hunger from the drive or the quiet, but I paid attention to every bite. I drank water and watched the trees sway. I did not see anyone pass by my sight. Later, I walked a short distance down a nearby trail, just enough to stretch my legs. The trail was narrow but clear, with packed dirt and occasional stones. I made sure to remember landmarks: a split log, a rock shaped like a broken step, a bent tree leaning over the path. I did not go far. I knew better than to wander too much when alone. When I returned, the campsite looked smaller somehow, like it had pulled inward as the forest darkened around it. Night came faster than I expected. The sky turned from pale blue to gray to black. Stars appeared in clusters between the branches. I lit a small fire, more for comfort than heat. The flames crackled softly and threw light onto the nearby trees, making the shadows move. I sat on the bench and listened. There were sounds everywhere once I stopped focusing on my own movements. Leaves rustling, insects buzzing, something heavier moving through brush far away. None of it felt wrong. It was just the forest being alive. Before sleeping, I put out the fire completely. I poured water on the embers until there was no steam, no glow. I did not want any risk. I brushed my teeth, changed clothes, and crawled into the tent. The fabric smelled faintly of dust and plastic. I zipped it closed and lay on my back, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed the day in slow pieces. The drive, the setup, the meal. Gradually my thoughts thinned out and sleep came. I woke up sometime in the night without knowing why. The darkness felt deeper than before. I listened, holding my breath. There was a sound outside, not close but not far either. A steady movement through leaves. Too slow to be wind. Too heavy to be small animals. My body tensed, but my mind stayed calm. Large animals lived here. Deer, maybe a bear. I stayed still. The sound moved past and faded. My heart slowed again. I reminded myself where I was and why. Eventually I slept again. Morning light filtered through the tent, turning everything gray and soft. I woke with stiff muscles but a clear head. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The forest looked different in daylight. Less mysterious. More ordinary. Dew clung to the grass and the table. The air was cool and fresh. I made coffee on the stove and drank it slowly, standing up, watching steam rise from the cup. I felt grounded, like my body had remembered something simple. I spent the morning doing nothing important. I cleaned the site, organized my gear, walked another short trail nearby. I took notes in a small notebook, just observations. The way the ground felt under my boots. The smell of sap when I brushed against a tree. The pattern of light through the branches. Time passed without pressure. In the afternoon, clouds rolled in. The light dimmed and the air grew heavier. I checked the weather on my phone, but there was no signal. I trusted my eyes instead. The clouds were thick but not fast-moving. I decided to stay. I secured loose items and made sure my tent stakes were solid. When the rain came, it was steady but gentle. Drops tapped against the tent and leaves. The ground darkened and the dust turned to mud. Being inside the tent during rain was calming. The sound was even and constant. I lay on my side and listened, letting my thoughts drift. At some point, I dozed off. When I woke again, the rain had stopped. Everything smelled clean. I stepped outside and saw fog lifting between the trees. The world felt close and quiet, like it was holding its breath. That evening, I cooked again and ate more than I planned to. The physical work and fresh air made me hungry. As night fell, the forest sounds returned, different from the night before. More insects, fewer large movements. I felt comfortable enough to sit outside for a while after dark, just watching the fire ring glow faintly with reflected light from my headlamp. Eventually, I went to bed. The second night was harder to sleep through, not because of fear, but because of awareness. Every small sound stood out. A branch snapping somewhere, leaves brushing together, something knocking lightly against the picnic table, maybe a falling pine cone. My mind tried to label each sound, to file it into a known category. That effort kept me awake longer than I wanted. At some point near dawn, I heard something that did not fit easily. It was not loud. It was a repeated noise, irregular but deliberate, like something being moved, then stopped, then moved again. It came from the direction of the loop road. I stayed still, listening. The sound lasted a few minutes, then stopped completely. No engine, no footsteps, just silence again. I waited a long time before relaxing. Morning came with low clouds and cool air. I decided that day would be my last night. Not because I felt threatened, but because the trip felt complete. I had gotten what I came for. Staying longer would only dilute it. I spent the day packing slowly, leaving only what I needed for the night. I double-checked my food bag and secured it again. That afternoon, I walked to the edge of the campground where the dirt road curved out of sight. I stood there for a while, looking at the tracks in the mud. Tire marks from earlier that week, maybe older. Nothing fresh. I felt a small sense of relief I had not realized I was missing. The final night was the calmest. The forest felt settled. I slept deeply and woke before sunrise. I did not rush. I made breakfast, packed the rest of my gear, and took one last look around the site. I made sure the fire ring was clean, trash packed out, ground as close as possible to how I found it. I stood still for a moment and listened. Birds were waking up. The forest felt open again. The drive out felt longer than the drive in, even though it was the same distance. Maybe because my mind was already shifting back toward normal life. When I reached pavement and my phone buzzed with missed notifications, I felt a strange mix of relief and loss. The quiet faded behind me, but it stayed somewhere inside. Nothing dramatic happened on that trip. No clear danger. No moment where everything almost went wrong. But the realism of it stayed with me. The way the forest did not care about my reasons or feelings. The way being alone sharpened my senses. The way small sounds felt bigger at night and smaller in daylight. The ending was simple. I went in, I stayed, and I came back out safely. That was enough. The trip closed cleanly, like a door that did not need to be forced. I returned home tired, grounded, and clear-headed, knowing I would remember that quiet for a long time. I went camping alone because I wanted space from everything that had been stacking up in my life. Work had turned into the same long days over and over, and I felt like my head was always full. I picked a random spot on a public land map, far from towns but still legal to camp. It was not a famous place. It did not have a name that people talk about online. That was part of why I chose it. I wanted quiet and I wanted to feel small for a few days. I packed simple gear. A small tent, a sleeping bag rated for cold nights, a tarp, food that did not need much cooking, water jugs, a stove, a headlamp, extra batteries, a paper map, and a basic first aid kit. I checked the weather and it looked stable. Cool days, cold nights, no storms expected. I told one person roughly where I would be, but I did not give exact coordinates. I figured that was enough. The drive took most of the day. Paved roads slowly turned into cracked roads, then gravel, then dirt. My phone signal faded out completely about an hour before I reached the spot I marked on the map. The land changed too. Trees got thicker and taller, the ground darker and softer. The air smelled damp and clean like soil and leaves. I parked in a small clearing that looked like people used it sometimes but not often. There were old tire marks and a few fire rings made of stones. No trash. That felt like a good sign. I chose a spot a short walk away from the clearing, far enough that I could not see the road but close enough that I could reach my car if I had to. The ground was flat and covered in dry needles. I checked for animal signs, droppings, tracks, anything fresh. I saw old deer tracks and nothing else that worried me. I set up my tent slowly and carefully. I always take my time with that. I wanted it solid. I staked it down, laid the tarp under it, and checked the seams. The light was already starting to soften. The sun filtered through the trees in long, thin lines. I cooked a simple meal and ate it while sitting on a log. The forest was quiet in a way that felt deep. Not silent, but steady. Wind in the branches, a bird far away, something small moving through leaves. Felt good. I cleaned up, stored my food in a sealed container, and put it a good distance away from the tent. I did not want animals coming close during the night. As the sky darkened, the temperature dropped fast. I put on extra layers and walked a slow circle around my camp with my headlamp, just checking. Everything looked normal. The beam of light cut through the darkness and made the trees look flat and pale. When I turned it off, the dark felt heavier, like it pressed in from all sides. I went to sleep early. The first night passed without anything strange. I woke up a few times from the cold, adjusted my sleeping bag, listened to the forest, then drifted off again. When morning came, it came quietly. No sudden noise, just a gradual lightening of the tent walls. I stepped outside and breathed in the cold air. My breath made small clouds. The ground was wet with dew. I spent the day hiking around the area with a small pack. I stayed within a few miles of camp, marking landmarks in my head. A fallen tree shaped like a hook, a rock face with white streaks, a narrow stream cutting through the ground. I did not see anyone else. No fresh footprints, no voices, no smoke. That made the place feel more remote than I expected. By the time I got back to camp, my legs were tired in a good way. I ate again, drank water, and sat watching the light fade. That second night felt different, though I could not say why at first. The forest sounded the same, but my body felt tense. I kept thinking I heard something out of rhythm. Not loud, just off. Like a sound that did not belong to the pattern of the woods. I told myself it was normal. Being alone does that to your head. I lay in my sleeping bag and stared at the tent ceiling. I focused on breathing slowly. Eventually, sleep came. I woke up suddenly sometime in the night. I did not know why. The forest was very still. Too still. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. I listened hard. After a while, I heard movement. Slow, heavy movement, not close enough to see but close enough to feel. Something moving through brush, stopping, then moving again. I stayed still. My heart beat fast, but I kept my breathing controlled. Animals move like that sometimes. Big ones do. I waited for the sound to fade. Instead, it circled. Not in a clean path, but in a wide, uneven arc. Leaves crunched softly. A branch snapped. Then silence again. I did not sleep much after that. When morning came, I got out of the tent and looked around carefully. The ground showed disturbed leaves in several places, but nothing clear. No obvious tracks. Could have been a deer. Could have been something else. The uncertainty stuck with me. I considered leaving that morning. I even started packing some things, then stopped. I told myself I was overreacting. I had planned to stay longer. Leaving early felt like giving in to fear without proof. I decided to stay one more night but be more alert. The day passed slowly. I did not hike far. I stayed near camp, kept my gear organized, and paid attention to sounds. The forest went on as usual. Birds moved, insects buzzed, light shifted through the trees. Nothing out of place. That evening, I moved my food container even farther away. I double-checked everything. When darkness fell, I stayed awake longer than before, sitting inside the tent with the headlamp off. I wanted my eyes adjusted to the dark. The night stretched on. Hours passed. Just when I started to relax, I heard footsteps. Not rustling, not the uneven sound of an animal. These were steady, measured, slow. They came from one direction and stopped. Then they started again, closer this time. I felt cold all over. My mind ran through explanations, but none of them settled me. I stayed silent. I did not move. The steps came close enough that I could hear breathing. Low and controlled. Then nothing. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. My muscles ached from staying still. I thought it was over. Then I heard something touch the side of my tent. Just a light pressure, like a hand resting there. The fabric moved inward slightly and then released. I did not react. I did not make a sound. I counted my breaths. After a while, the pressure did not come back. The steps slowly moved away. The forest sounds returned, but they felt forced, like a thin cover over something else. I stayed awake until morning. When the sky finally lightened, I got out of the tent immediately. My body felt heavy and slow. I checked the tent wall. There was a smudge of dirt near where I felt the pressure. It was not an animal mark. It looked like a palm print, stretched and uneven. That was enough. I packed as fast as I could without making mistakes. I did not eat. I did not explore. I loaded everything into my pack and walked straight to the car. The forest felt different now. The trees felt closer together. The path felt longer. When I reached the car, I dropped my pack and unlocked the door with shaking hands. I looked around one last time. I did not see anyone. I started the engine and drove away without looking back. The road felt endless, but eventually my phone picked up signal again. I did not stop until I reached a town. I sat in the car for a long time, letting the feeling drain out of me. I never went back to that place. I still camp, but I choose spots with more people around now. I think about that night often, especially the quiet moments when the world feels too still. Whatever was out there did not chase me. It did not need to. It made its presence clear enough. The ending of that trip was not dramatic. I did not run through the woods. I did not get hurt. I left under my own power. That is what stays with me. Something chose to let me go. I do not know why, and I do not need to know. What matters is that I listened to the warning and I walked away. And that decision is the reason I am still here thinking about it instead of being another story that ends differently. I packed my car late in the afternoon without any clear plan other than driving until the road stopped feeling familiar. I had been working too much and sleeping badly, and I wanted a few days where time moved slower. I picked a small state forest that allowed dispersed camping. No reservations, no marked sites, just a gravel road cutting through trees and a rule that said camp at least a certain distance from the road and water. That was enough for me. I had done this before and trusted my routine. The drive took longer than I expected. The sun dropped lower, and the light turned orange through the windshield. The last gas station was a small building with old pumps and a flickering light, and after that the road narrowed and the trees closed in. The pavement turned to gravel, then dirt. Dust followed the car and hung in the air behind me. My phone lost signal, which I expected, and I put it in the glove box to save battery. I drove with the windows down, smelling pine and dry leaves, listening to the tires crunch and the engine work harder uphill. I stopped when I found a wide pull-off near a stand of tall trees. There was no sign of recent use. No trash, no tire tracks beyond my own, no fire ring. The ground was flat enough, and there was a slight slope that would carry rain away if it came. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment, listening. The forest had that quiet that is never truly quiet. Wind in the branches, distant birds settling down for the evening, insects starting their night rhythm. It felt calm and empty in a good way. I set up my tent carefully, making sure the ground was clear of sharp rocks and sticks. I took my time, checking the seams, staking it down tight. I laid out my sleeping pad and bag, then organized my food in a sealed container. I hung it from a tree a good distance away, higher than I thought was needed, because I had learned that lesson before. I kept my movements steady and deliberate. Rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes matter more when you are alone. As the light faded, the temperature dropped. I put on a heavier jacket and cooked a simple meal on my small stove. The smell of warm food mixed with the forest air. I ate slowly, watching the sky darken through the trees. When I finished, I cleaned everything right away and stored it. I did not want to leave anything out that might attract animals. I brushed my teeth away from camp and rinsed carefully. When full darkness settled, the forest changed its tone. The daytime birds were gone, replaced by the soft sounds of night creatures. Leaves rustled in small bursts. Something moved through brush far enough away that I could not see it. These sounds did not scare me. They were normal. I had heard them many times before. I sat for a while longer, letting my eyes adjust, then went into my tent and zipped it closed. I lay on my back, staring at the dark fabric above me. My body relaxed slowly. The day had been long, and the quiet worked on me. My thoughts drifted. I listened to my breathing and the steady sounds outside. At some point, sleep took over. I woke in the middle of the night with a tight feeling in my chest. I did not know why at first. The forest was still too still. The usual background noise had dropped away, leaving a thick silence. I held my breath and listened. After a moment, the normal sounds returned in small pieces. Insects started again, then a distant call from an animal I could not place. My heart slowed. I told myself it was just a shift in the night cycle. I rolled onto my side and tried to sleep. Later, I woke again, this time to the sound of footsteps. They were slow and uneven, not the quick light steps of a deer. The steps stopped, then started again. I stayed completely still. I did not reach for anything. I listened carefully, counting the space between sounds. The steps circled at a distance, not close to my tent, but close enough that I could tell they were there. After a long stretch of time, they moved away and faded into the trees. I did not sleep well after that. I stayed half awake until dawn, checking the time by the faint light that crept into the tent. When morning finally came, I unzipped the door and stepped out. The air was cold and damp. My breath made small clouds. The forest looked normal in the daylight. Sunlight filtered through branches, lighting patches of ground. Birds moved and called. Nothing looked disturbed. I walked around my camp, checking for tracks. The ground was hard in places and soft in others. Near the edge of my camp, I found a few marks that could have been from an animal or from a person wearing heavy boots. They were not clear enough to say. I did not panic, but I paid attention. I told myself that the forest is shared, and people move through it in ways you do not always see. I made breakfast and packed a small day bag. I planned to hike deeper into the forest and explore. I marked my camp location on my map and compass, even though the area was simple. I always did that. Habits keep you alive when your mind gets tired. The trail I followed was faint, more of a suggestion than a path. It wound through trees and over small rises. I moved at a steady pace, watching the ground and the trees ahead. The forest here was dense in places, open in others. Fallen logs crossed the way, and I stepped over them carefully. The air smelled of earth and sap. Sunlight warmed my back. As I walked, I noticed small things that felt off. A broken branch that looked fresh, not from weather. A piece of cloth snagged on a thorn bush, faded and torn. An old fire ring hidden under leaves, cold and abandoned. None of these things were dangerous by themselves, but together they told me that people came through here more often than I thought. After a few hours, I stopped near a small creek to rest and drink water. I filtered it slowly, checking the flow and the clarity. While I waited, I scanned the area around me. I had that feeling again, the sense of being watched. It is hard to explain. It was not fear exactly, more like awareness turned up too high. I listened. I heard wind, water, birds, nothing else. I continued on, but my pace changed. I checked behind me more often. I marked trees in my mind, noting shapes and scars so I could tell if I was walking in circles. The forest can play tricks on you if you let it. I stayed focused. In the afternoon, the sky clouded over. The light dimmed, and the air grew heavier. I heard thunder far away. I decided to turn back toward camp. I did not want to be far out if a storm hit. The trail back looked different from this direction, and I had to stop a few times to be sure I was going the right way. I trusted my compass more than my memory. When I reached camp, the first drops of rain started to fall. I moved quickly, securing my gear and checking the tent. The rain picked up, turning into a steady downpour. I sat inside, listening to it hit the fabric and the leaves. Water ran in small streams across the ground. I checked for leaks and adjusted the stakes. The storm lasted longer than I expected. Thunder rolled overhead, and lightning flashed, lighting the tent walls in sharp bursts. I stayed still, grounded, waiting it out. When it finally passed, the forest smelled clean and sharp. Steam rose from the ground where the sun broke through again. That evening felt different. The forest did not return to its earlier calm. The sounds were uneven, starting and stopping. I cooked quickly and ate inside the tent vestibule. I kept my headlamp off unless I needed it. Light draws attention, and I wanted none. As darkness fell, I heard movement again. This time it was closer. I could hear branches shift and leaves crunch. The steps stopped just beyond the edge of my camp. I held my breath and listened. Time stretched. The steps moved again, slow, deliberate, circling. I stayed silent, my body tense, my mind racing through options. I had no weapon, only a small knife and common sense. After what felt like hours, the movement drifted away. I did not sleep. I stayed awake until morning, watching the light slowly return. When dawn came, I packed my camp without delay. I checked the area one last time. Near where my food had been hung, I found clearer tracks. Heavy boots, worn soles, not fresh from last night, but not old either. They led away into the trees. I did not wait to explore. I loaded my car and drove out as soon as I could. The road felt longer on the way back. Every bend made me tense until I reached pavement and then the main road. When I finally had phone signal again, I felt a weight lift from my chest. I drove to a town and stopped for food and gas. The normal sounds and sights grounded me. I did not tell anyone what had happened. There was nothing clear to report, no crime, no proof. Just a feeling and a few marks in the dirt. When I got home, I unpacked slowly. I cleaned my gear and laid it out to dry. That night, in my own bed, I slept deeply. In the days that followed, the memory stayed with me. The forest did nothing wrong. It was not evil or magical. It was simply a place where you are not always alone, even when you think you are. The trip ended without injury or loss, and that mattered. I learned again that being prepared is not enough on its own. You also have to listen to your instincts and respect the unknown spaces between people. I still camp alone, but I choose my places more carefully now, and I leave sooner when something feels wrong. That trip reminded me that the wild is real, shared, and indifferent, and that coming back safely is always the true ending that matters. I planned the trip in a simple way. I picked a random patch of public land that allowed dispersed camping, far from towns and far from marked campgrounds. I wanted quiet and space. I wanted to test myself and spend time alone without noise. I packed my old tent, a sleeping bag that smelled faintly of smoke from past trips, a small stove, canned food, water jugs, a headlamp, spare batteries, a paper map, and a basic first aid kit. I checked the weather once and saw clear skies for most of the week with one chance of rain near the end. That was enough for me. I left early in the morning before the sun fully rose. The drive took several hours. Paved roads turned into cracked pavement, then gravel, then dirt. My car shook as I drove slower and slower. Dust coated the windshield and crept into the vents. The land opened up into rolling hills covered in dry grass and scattered trees. There were no houses anymore, no power lines, no signs except an old wooden post with faded paint pointing toward a trail name I could barely read. I parked near the edge of a wide clearing and turned off the engine. The silence hit me right away. It was not total silence, but it felt heavy. Wind moved through grass. Somewhere far off, a bird called once and then stopped. I stood outside the car for a while just listening. The air smelled clean and dry. I stretched my legs and shoulders and felt the stiffness from the long drive fade. I locked the car even though I knew no one was around. It was a habit I never broke. I slung my pack over my shoulders and started walking. The trail was barely a trail at all, just a faint line where grass was pressed down and dirt showed through. I followed it for a long time, checking my map now and then to keep my direction. After a couple of hours, I found a spot that felt right. It sat near a shallow creek that still had water moving through it. Trees provided some cover from the wind, and the ground was flat enough to pitch a tent. I set my pack down and took a slow look around. I checked for animal tracks and signs of flooding. Everything seemed normal. I picked up sticks and small branches and cleared the ground. I set up my tent carefully, making sure the stakes were solid. I laid out my sleeping bag and pad inside. I set up my stove on a flat rock and stacked my food away from the tent. The first day passed quietly. I cooked a simple meal and ate slowly, watching the light change as the sun moved lower. Shadows grew longer. The temperature dropped. I put on an extra layer and sat near the creek. Water moved over stones in a steady pattern that felt calming. As night came, the sky filled with stars. There were more stars than I ever saw near home. They looked sharp and bright, like they could cut through the dark. I crawled into my tent and fell asleep easily. I woke in the night once when the wind picked up. The tent fabric moved and made soft sounds. I lay still and listened. Nothing felt wrong. I went back to sleep. In the morning, I woke early and felt rested. I cooked breakfast and drank coffee while sitting on a rock. The world felt slow and simple. I spent the day hiking around the area, following the creek upstream and then back down. I took notes in a small notebook about landmarks so I would not get turned around. I returned to camp before dark and cooked dinner. On the second night, I noticed something small but strange. When I stepped out of my tent to use the bathroom, I saw footprints near the creek that were not there earlier. They looked human. I knew it could have been someone passing through, maybe another camper or a hiker. This was public land after all. Still, it made me pause. The prints went along the water and then disappeared into the trees. I told myself it was nothing. I went back into my tent and slept, though not as deeply as the first night. The next day, I packed a small day bag and went farther than before. I wanted to explore a ridge I saw on the map. The climb was slow and tiring. The sun was strong, and sweat ran down my back. When I reached the top, the view was wide and empty. Hills rolled away in all directions. No buildings, no roads, nothing moving. I sat there for a long time, eating a snack and feeling small. On the way back down, I noticed a piece of cloth tied to a branch. It was old and faded like a marker. I did not remember seeing it on the way up. I shrugged it off and kept walking. Back at camp, things felt slightly off, though I could not explain why. My food bag looked like it had been moved. It was still closed and nothing was missing, but it sat in a different place. I checked the ground for tracks and saw nothing clear. I told myself animals could have nudged it. I was tired, and my mind might be playing tricks on me. I cooked dinner and cleaned up carefully. As the sky darkened, the forest seemed louder. Insects buzzed. Leaves rustled. I went to sleep later than usual. I woke in the night to the sound of footsteps. They were slow and careful. I lay frozen, heart pounding. I listened closely. The steps moved near the creek, then closer to my camp. I could hear breathing, low and steady. I stayed still, barely breathing myself. After a long time, the sounds moved away. I did not sleep much after that. When morning came, I felt drained and tense. In daylight, everything looked normal again. No signs of anyone else. No fresh tracks. No missing items. I walked around camp in a wide circle and found nothing. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave right then. Another part told me I was overreacting. I had planned to stay longer, and I did not want fear to decide for me. I decided to stay one more night and then leave early the next day. The day passed slowly. Clouds rolled in, and the air felt heavy. I spent most of the time near camp, keeping myself busy with small tasks. I cleaned my gear, reorganized my pack, and checked my map again and again. I felt watched, though I never saw anyone. When evening came, I ate quickly and secured everything. I kept my headlamp close and my knife within reach. I lay in my tent fully dressed. That night, the footsteps returned. They circled my camp. I could hear branches snap under weight. I could hear fabric brush against leaves. Whoever it was stayed just outside the edge of my light. I did not move. I did not make a sound. I focused on breathing slowly. After what felt like hours, the sounds faded again. I waited until the sky lightened before I moved. The first light, I packed as fast as I could. I did not eat breakfast. I shoved gear into my pack and broke down the tent with shaking hands. I took one last look around, trying to spot anything that could explain the nights. I saw nothing. I started walking back toward my car, moving faster than I should have on uneven ground. Halfway back, I saw the cloth marker again. This time, there were more of them tied along the trail. They had not been there before. My stomach dropped. I did not stop to examine them. I kept going. When I reached the clearing and saw my car, relief washed over me so strongly that my legs felt weak. I unlocked the car, threw my pack in the back, and got inside. I locked the doors and sat there for a moment, breathing hard. I started the engine and drove away without looking back. As the road turned to gravel and then pavement, My hands slowly stopped shaking. By the time I reached the main road, the sun was fully up. Other cars passed me and normal life crept back in. The fear faded into something duller but still present. When I got home, I unpacked and cleaned my gear. Everything was intact. There was no clear proof that anyone had been there. Still, I knew what I heard and what I saw. I reported the markers to the local ranger office and gave them the location. They took notes and thanked me. They did not seem surprised. That trip changed how I camp. I still go out alone sometimes, but I choose places closer to known trails and people. I trust my instincts more now. When something feels wrong, I listen to that feeling. The wilderness is not evil or magical. It is just a place where people can hide, and where small signs can mean a lot. I left that random place with all my gear and my life, and that was enough. I planned the camping trip without much thought. It was not meant to be special. I just wanted to be away from people for a while and sleep somewhere quiet. Work had been heavy for months. My days felt the same and my nights felt short. I picked a spot on a map that looked empty and far from towns. It was a public land area with no services and no marked campsites. Just forest, dirt roads, and long stretches where nothing showed up on the screen. I packed the usual things. A tent that had a few old stains on the floor. A sleeping bag that smelled faintly like smoke from past trips. A small stove, a pot, canned food, dried food, water jugs, a headlamp, extra batteries, a first aid kit, a hatchet, a folding saw, and a cheap folding chair. I brought a paper map even though I had a phone with offline maps. I also brought a notebook and pen, not to write anything important, just to have something physical to hold at night. I left early in the morning. The drive took hours. The road slowly changed from wide and clean to narrow and cracked. Gas stations became rare. Phone signal faded and then disappeared. I kept driving. I liked the feeling of being cut off. Felt calm at first. The last stretch was a dirt road with deep ruts and loose rocks. I drove slow and careful. Dust followed behind the car like a long cloud. I found a small clearing near a line of trees. It was flat enough for a tent and close enough to the road that I could leave easily if needed. No signs of other campers. No trash. No fire ring. Just grass, dirt, and trees that looked old and thick. The air smelled dry and clean. The only sounds were wind in the branches and insects moving through the grass. I parked the car and sat inside for a minute before getting out. That pause felt important. Once I stepped out, the quiet felt heavier. Pressed in from all sides. I checked the time. Mid-afternoon. Plenty of daylight. I set up camp slowly. I laid out the tent and smoothed the ground with my boot. I pushed the stakes in deep and checked the lines. I rolled out the sleeping bag inside and placed my pack near the entrance. I set the stove on a flat rock and tested it. It worked fine. I stacked firewood even though I was not sure I would use it. The wood was dry and cracked easily. I kept everything neat. I like order when I am alone. As the sun lowered, the light changed. The trees looked taller. Shadows stretched long across the ground. The temperature dropped a little. I ate an early meal. Simple food. Nothing fancy. I drank water and cleaned the pot. I sat in the folding chair and watched the sky shift colors. The quiet stayed steady. No voices. No engines. No distant sounds of people. That was what I wanted. When night came, it came fast. The stars were clear and sharp, more than I ever see near home. The moon was thin and gave little light. I used the headlamp to move around. I locked the car even though no one was there. I checked the area around the camp once more. Nothing had changed. I went into the tent and zipped it closed. I lay on my back and listened. Wind moved through the trees in waves. Leaves brushed against each other. Somewhere far away an animal moved, maybe small, maybe not. I did not think much about it. Forests are full of sounds. Sleep came slow. The ground felt harder than I remembered. The sleeping bag twisted around my legs. I turned from side to side. My thoughts wandered. I thought about work. I thought about things I should have done differently in life. I stared into the dark and waited for sleep. At some point I slept. I do not know when. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. My eyes opened without warning. My heart was beating faster than normal. The tent was dark. The headlamp lay next to me. I listened. Something felt off, but I could not name it. I heard movement outside. Not loud. Slow. Heavy enough to press down grass or dirt. It moved, stopped, then moved again. I stayed still. I did not reach for the headlamp right away. I did not want to make noise. My breath felt too loud in my ears. The movement circled the tent. Not fast, not careless. Felt steady, controlled. The steps were uneven, like whoever or whatever it was did not care about being quiet, but also did not rush. I could hear the sound of weight shifting. I told myself it was an animal. Maybe a deer. Maybe something smaller. But the pattern felt wrong. Animals usually sniff, pause, move quickly, then leave. This stayed close. The sound stopped near the back of the tent. I could feel the fabric move slightly as air shifted. Something brushed against the tent wall. Not hard, just enough to make the nylon flex. My body went tense. I held my breath. Nothing else happened for a long time. Minutes passed. My arms started to ache from staying still. Finally, the sound moved away. Slow steps, then silence. I did not sleep after that. I waited for the first hint of light. When morning came, it felt like relief. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The ground around the tent was marked. Footprints. Human footprints. Not boots like mine. Different size. Different tread. They circled the tent once and then walked away toward the trees. I stood there and stared at them for a long time. The dirt was dry enough to hold the shape clearly. They were fresh. Made during the night. I looked around the clearing. Nothing else was disturbed. The car was untouched. My gear was still where I left it. No trash. No signs of a camp nearby. I felt a heavy weight in my chest. This was no animal. Someone had walked around my tent while I slept. I packed up fast. Not careless, but fast. I shoved things into bags instead of folding them neatly. I loaded the car and took one last look at the footprints. They led into the trees and disappeared among roots and fallen leaves. I drove away without stopping. I did not camp again for a long time after that. I think about that night often. There was no attack, no confrontation, no clear reason. Just the fact that someone was there, close enough to touch the tent, and chose not to do anything. That is what stays with me. The quiet decision to circle and leave. The reminder that being alone in the wild does not mean being alone at all. I planned the trip on a normal work night when everything felt too loud and tight. I wanted a place where nothing expected anything from me. I picked a random spot on a map, a state forest far from cities, a place with dirt roads, old campsites, and no cell signal. I packed the way I always do, slowly and careful, checking things twice. Tent, sleeping bag, tarp, food, water, stove, lighter, extra lighter, knife, first aid kit, headlamp, spare batteries, map, compass. I did not bring anything fancy, just what I needed to stay alive and comfortable for a few days. I left early in the morning before the sun was fully up, driving while the world was still quiet and empty. The drive took hours. Highways turned into two-lane roads, then into narrow roads with cracked pavement, then into gravel. Trees closed in on both sides, tall and thick. Pine, oak, and old dead trunks leaning at odd angles. The forest felt heavy, not scary, just full, like it had been there forever and did not care that I was passing through. I parked at a small pull-off near a trailhead that looked barely used. There was a wooden sign with faded letters and bullet holes. I shouldered my pack and locked the car, even though I knew it would not matter much out there. The trail was narrow and uneven. Roots crossed it like traps. The ground was soft in places and hard in others. I could hear birds moving through the trees and the sound of wind high above, pushing the tops of the branches. The air smelled damp and green. After a couple of miles, the trail split, and I took the smaller path that led toward a creek marked on the map. I wanted water nearby, but not right next to camp. I walked until my legs felt warm and my breathing settled into a steady rhythm. I found a clearing not far from the creek. tucked behind a line of thick bushes. It looked like someone had camped there long ago. There was a flat spot, a circle of stones blackened by old fire, and a fallen log that worked as a seat. The ground was dry enough, and the trees gave good cover from wind. I dropped my pack and stood there for a while, just listening. No voices, no engines, just the forest doing what it always does. I set up camp slow and careful. I cleared small sticks and rocks, laid down the tarp, then the tent. I staked it tight and made sure the rainfly was secure. I hung my food bag high between two trees, farther from the tent. I filtered water from the creek, watching the clear stream move over stones, cold and fast. I cooked a simple meal and ate sitting on the log, watching the light change as the sun moved lower. As evening came, the forest shifted. Birds quieted down, replaced by insects. The air cooled fast. Shadows stretched long and thick. I built a small fire, just enough to cook and warm my hands. The flames made the trees around me look taller and closer. Every sound carried farther. A branch snapping somewhere made my head turn, but it was nothing, just the normal movement of the woods settling for the night. I went to bed early. The ground was hard, but I was tired enough that it did not matter. Inside the tent, the sounds felt closer. Wind brushing the fabric, leaves falling, something small moving near the ground. I reminded myself that this was normal. I had done this many times before. I slept in short stretches, waking and drifting off again. Sometime in the night, I woke fully. Not from a noise, but from a feeling. The kind that pulls you out of sleep without warning. I lay still, listening. The forest was quiet in a way that felt off. Not empty, just paused. No insects, no wind. I waited, breathing slow, telling myself it would pass. Eventually, sounds returned, and I slept again. Morning came gray and cool. Fog hung low between the trees. Everything was damp. I made coffee and watched the steam rise. The quiet from the night was gone, replaced by the steady background noise of life. I felt calm again. The strange moment from the night faded as the day took shape. I spent the day hiking farther from camp, following the creek upstream. The water cut through rocks and fallen trees. In places, the trail disappeared, and I had to pick my way along the bank. I found old signs of people long gone, rusted cans half buried, a broken boot sole, a length of rope stiff with age. None of it felt recent, just leftovers from other people passing through years ago. In the afternoon, clouds rolled in thick and fast. The air grew heavy. I headed back toward camp, feeling the pressure change in my ears. Rain started suddenly, hard and cold. I pulled on my jacket and pushed on, slipping once on wet roots but catching myself. By the time I reached camp, I was soaked. I took shelter in the tent and waited it out. Rain hammered the fabric, loud and steady. Water ran in small streams through the clearing. I checked the edges of the tent, making sure nothing was pooling. Everything held. The rain lasted for hours, then slowed to a drizzle, then stopped. The forest after rain feels different. Sharper smells, darker colors. Everything feels closer. I stepped out and stretched, feeling the chill sink into my clothes. I built a fire again using dry wood I had saved. Took time, but soon I had a steady flame. I cooked and ate, watching steam rise from the ground. That night, I stayed up longer, sitting by the fire until it burned down to coals. The forest felt awake in a different way. I could hear larger movements now, something heavy stepping far off, a branch breaking under weight. I did not panic. Large animals live in forests. That is part of it. I kept the fire small and clean, then went to bed. Sleep came harder this time. The ground felt harder. Every sound felt sharper. At some point, I heard movement closer than before. Slow steps, careful. Not crashing, not rushing. Just moving. I lay still, listening. The steps circled the clearing, staying just outside the fire ring. I could hear breathing, deep and steady. My heart pounded, but my mind stayed clear. This was an animal. A deer, maybe a bear. I did not move. Eventually, the steps moved away. The forest settled again. Morning came with sunlight cutting through the trees. I felt stiff and tired, but safe. I packed up slowly, planning to move camp farther in. I wanted to see more of the area. I followed the trail deeper, away from the creek this time, climbing higher ground. The forest changed as I went. Thinner trees, rockier soil, more wind. I found another campsite near the top of a ridge. No fire ring this time, just a flat spot with a view through the trees down into a long valley. I set up again, feeling exposed but drawn to the openness. The sky was clear, blue and wide. That afternoon I explored the ridge. I found an old logging road, barely visible, overgrown with grass and young trees, curved away and disappeared. I followed it for a while, then turned back, marking my path carefully. As evening came, the wind picked up. It moved through the trees in waves, making a sound like distant water. I secured everything tight. The temperature dropped fast. I cooked early and got into the tent before full dark. That night was different. The wind did not stop, pushed and pulled at the tent. Trees creaked and groaned. Somewhere, something fell hard, shaking the ground. I lay awake, feeling small, not afraid of something watching me, but aware of how little control I had over any of it. At some point, I heard the sound of metal. A soft clink, like something touching something else, came from the direction of the old road. I listened hard. It happened again, slow and spaced out. I told myself it was loose metal somewhere, maybe an old sign moving in the wind. Still, I stayed awake until exhaustion took me. In the morning, I decided it was time to leave. Not because of fear, but because the place felt done with me. I packed carefully, checking everything. When I walked back toward the old road to head out, I saw it. An old hunting stand, metal frame, half collapsed, hidden in the trees. The wind had been rocking it. The sound made sense now. The walk back to the car felt longer. The forest felt neutral again, neither welcoming nor threatening, just there. When I reached the trailhead and saw my car, I felt a deep release in my chest that I did not realize I had been holding. I loaded my pack, sat for a while with the door open, and looked back at the trees. Nothing moved in a way that stood out. No sign of anything following or watching, just the forest going on without me. The drive home was quiet. The road widened. Cell signal returned. Messages came in. The world rushed back. But part of me stayed out there, in the quiet moments between wind and breath, where nothing spoke and everything was real. When I got home, I unpacked slowly, letting dirt fall onto the floor. My body ached and I slept hard that night. In the days after, the memories stayed clear. Not as fear, but as respect. The forest did not try to hurt me. It did not try to scare me. It simply reminded me that I was small, temporary, and alive. That was the end of the trip. I went in alone, paid attention, and left when it was time. Nothing chased me out. Nothing followed me home. The experience stayed where it belonged, in the trees and the wind, clear and complete. I went camping alone because I needed quiet in a way that only real distance can give. Not the kind of quiet where there are still cars in the background or voices drifting from somewhere you cannot see. I wanted the kind of quiet where your own movements sound too loud and you start noticing things you usually ignore. I picked a random spot on the map that looked far enough from towns and roads but still reachable with my old car. It was late fall, not deep winter yet, but cold enough that most people had already packed up their tents for the year. The drive took most of the day. Long stretches of road had no signs, no gas stations, no houses. Trees pressed close on both sides, bare branches clawing at the sky. The sky stayed gray and flat, the kind that feels heavy even when it does not rain. By the time I turned onto the dirt road that led toward the camping area, my phone had no signal. I expected that. I shut it off to save battery anyway and tossed it into the glove box. I did not want to check it every few minutes out of habit. The dirt road was rough and uneven. Rocks scraped the underside of my car, and the tires slipped in muddy spots where water had not dried. Fallen leaves covered everything, hiding holes and ruts. I drove slow, careful not to get stuck, because I knew there would be no one coming by if something went wrong. That thought made me more alert, not scared, just aware of my situation. I had done solo trips before. I packed well, planned carefully, and respected the risks. After almost an hour on that road, I reached a small clearing marked by a faded wooden sign. The letters were hard to read, worn down by years of weather. It looked like a place that had once been more popular but had been mostly forgotten. The clearing was wide enough for a few tents, with a rough fire ring made of stones in the center. Tall trees surrounded the area on all sides, blocking most of the wind. The ground was soft with layers of old leaves and pine needles. I parked my car near the edge of the clearing and turned off the engine. The silence after the engine stopped felt deep and sudden. No traffic sounds, no distant machines, just wind moving through branches and the occasional bird calling somewhere far away. I sat in the car for a moment, listening, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through the trees. I got out and stretched. The air smelled damp and cold, mixed with the sharp scent of pine. My breath showed faintly when I exhaled. I opened the trunk and started unloading my gear. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, small stove, extra clothes, flashlight, first aid kit. Everything had its place. I laid items out neatly on the ground, moving slowly and with purpose. Being organized out here mattered. I chose a flat spot not far from the fire ring and began setting up the tent. The ground was uneven in places, roots pushing up under the leaves, but I found a spot that worked. Hammering the stakes into the soil took effort. The ground was firm and cold. Each strike echoed a bit louder than I expected, the sound bouncing between the trees. When the tent was finally up, I checked it carefully, pulling on the fabric and stakes to make sure it was secure. As the light started to fade, the woods seemed to close in slightly. Shadows grew longer, stretching between the trees. I gathered firewood while there was still enough light to see clearly. Dead branches snapped easily under my hands. I carried armfuls back to the fire ring, stacking them neatly. I did not want to wander far once it got dark. The forest floor was covered in leaves that made every step uncertain. I lit a small fire as evening settled in. The flames caught quickly, dry wood popping and cracking. The warmth felt good on my hands and face. I cooked a simple meal, something hot and filling, and ate slowly. I watched the fire while I ate, the way the flames twisted and leaned with the breeze. Sparks rose and vanished into the dark above. Night came fully not long after. The forest changed once the sun was gone. Sounds became sharper and harder to place. Leaves rustled. Branches creaked. Something small moved through the underbrush, stopping and starting. I knew it was probably animals, nothing unusual, but my body still reacted to each sound. My senses felt tuned higher, like everything mattered more. I kept the fire going for a while, adding wood steadily. I did not want it to go out too soon. The light made the clearing feel safer, more defined. Beyond the firelight, the forest was a solid wall of darkness. I avoided shining my flashlight too much. Sometimes seeing too clearly into the dark makes your mind work harder than it should. Eventually, the cold crept in more strongly. I cleaned up, stored my food properly away from the tent, and banked the fire so it would die down safely. I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped the tent closed, and lay on my back staring at the faint outline of the tent ceiling. My breathing slowed. The ground beneath me was hard but manageable. I shifted until I found a position that felt right. Sleep did not come immediately. The forest was too alive. Wind brushed the tent fabric softly. Somewhere in the distance, an animal called out, a long drawn-out sound that echoed through the trees. It happened again, then stopped. I reminded myself that I was prepared, that this was normal. I focused on my breathing, on the warmth of the sleeping bag. At some point, I drifted off. I woke up suddenly, unsure why at first. The darkness felt heavier, thicker. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. I listened carefully. There was a sound, faint but steady, like footsteps moving slowly across leaves. Not rushed, not heavy, just deliberate. I stayed still, barely breathing, trying to understand what I was hearing. The sound stopped. Silence returned, deep and wide. I waited, counting seconds in my head. Nothing else happened. No voices, no sudden movements, just the forest settling again. I told myself it was an animal passing through the clearing. Deer, maybe. They moved quietly when they wanted to. Still, I did not relax right away. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me back into sleep. Morning came gray and cold. Light filtered through the trees, dull and flat. I sat up slowly, joints stiff from the cold ground. My breath fogged the air inside the tent. I unzipped it and looked out. The clearing looked unchanged. No signs of disturbance. The fire ring was cold. Ash scattered the way I had left it. The forest stood still, almost calm. I made breakfast, warming my hands over a small flame from the stove. The simple routine helped settle my mind. I drank hot coffee and ate slowly, watching the clearing. Everything felt normal again. I packed a small bag with water and snacks and decided to explore a bit before breaking camp. I did not plan to go far, just enough to stretch my legs and see what was around. The forest beyond the clearing was thick. Trees grew close together, branches tangled overhead. The ground sloped gently downward in one direction. I followed what looked like a faint trail, more a suggestion than a real path. Leaves covered it almost completely. The air felt colder here, sunlight barely reaching the ground. As I walked, I paid attention to my surroundings. Broken branches, animal tracks, changes in the terrain. I marked mental notes of landmarks so I could find my way back easily. A large fallen tree, a cluster of rocks, a tree with a split trunk. I did not rely on just one thing. After about half an hour, I noticed something odd. The forest felt quieter. Not silent, but different. Fewer bird sounds, less movement. It was subtle, the kind of thing you might ignore if you were distracted. I stopped walking and stood still. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. I turned slowly, scanning the area. Nothing obvious stood out. No movement. No shapes that did not belong. Still, the feeling stayed with me. I decided to head back toward the camp. There was no reason to push deeper for no purpose. On the way back, I realized the trail looked slightly different. Not drastically, but enough to make me slow down. The fallen tree I remembered seemed farther away than it should have been. The cluster of rocks was there, but the angle felt wrong. I stopped and looked around more carefully. The forest was dense, repeating patterns of trunks and branches everywhere. It would be easy to get turned around if you were careless. I adjusted my direction, trusting my sense of slope and light. After a few minutes, I saw the edge of the clearing through the trees. Relief washed over me, quiet and steady. I stepped back into the open space, feeling the tension ease from my shoulders. The rest of the day passed without anything clearly wrong. I packed up my camp slowly, double-checking everything. I did not rush. Still, I kept glancing toward the trees, especially the darker areas. I could not shake the feeling from earlier, even though nothing had happened. By late afternoon, I was ready to leave. I loaded the car, making sure nothing was left behind. Before getting in, I stood for a moment and looked around the clearing one last time. The place felt empty again, just trees and leaves and cold air. Whatever tension I felt seemed tied to me, not the land itself. The drive out was slower than the drive in. The dirt road had gotten softer in places as the day warmed slightly. My tires slid once or twice, but I kept control. When I finally reached the paved road, I felt a clear sense of relief. The kind that comes not from fear ending, but from responsibility easing. As I drove back toward civilization, the forest thinned. Houses appeared. My phone buzzed as it found a signal again. I ignored it. I kept driving, focused on the road ahead. Looking back on that trip, nothing dramatic happened. No clear danger, no obvious threat. But the experience stayed with me. The quiet moments, the way the forest felt different at night, the way my senses sharpened when I was truly alone. It reminded me that being out there means accepting uncertainty. Not everything that matters announces itself loudly. I made it home safe, unpacked my gear, and went back to my normal life. The trip ended cleanly and without incident. Still, when I think about that clearing and those woods, I remember how aware I felt of every sound and movement. It was a reminder of how small we are out there, and how important it is to respect that fact. The trip ended the way it should have, with me returning on my own terms, carrying the experience with me and nothing more.